Showed off at work today. How much harder could it be?
Don't say that, Matt. Famous last words.
Yeah, that's not even the browser I want. Okay, because I closed it. Smart. I guess this. Sorry, getting there. Right. No, docs. Python. Okay, so these are the MicroPython docs. I'm sure you're vaguely familiar with them. This is all built in Sphinx. Sphinx is a very widely used tool, particularly in the Python space, but actually it's actually used quite widely anyway. Sphinx is built around restructured text, which is a bit like Markdown, which you're probably more familiar with. Restructured text just has a few more advantages in terms of references, and it's a bit more precise, I suppose, and a bit more flexible. It's also a bit more of a steeper learning curve. The syntax isn't so easy for beginners to pick up. But we've got the benefit that there's a whole lot of documentation in there, and a lot of the time you're just tweaking it. So what I'm going to have a look at today is how you can build the documentation and host it locally. So what you'll need is a clone of MicroPython, which I happen to have handy. And you need Docker installed, because I usually insist on putting my environments, whether it's a C environment or a MicroPython environment or whatever, into containers, because I don't really want to install any tools in my host system. So in this case, someone's kindly packaged up the Sphinx tools and added some themes and extensions that are commonly used. So it happens that they've got the theme that MicroPython uses, which is nice. So mini docs, Sphinx doc is the name of the container here. We're just using the Sphinx auto build feature, which is part of the Sphinx project. It takes a few parameters, which aren't so important right now. But what auto build does is initially builds documentation that you pointed at. In this case, that's what that dot's for, build the documentation from the current directory and build it into the _build directory. And once it's built the documentation, it will then watch your file system for any changes and do incremental builds over whatever has changed. Now, in this case, it's also hosting a small web server. That web server acts like when you make a request over that socket, it's just like you would be making a request over to docs.micropython.org. So to make all of that work, you've got a bit of Docker magic here to remove the container once it's finished with. You're doing a volume mount of the current directory to a folder inside the container called MP. In this case, you can call that whatever you want. Then you make the working directory mp/docs inside the container. And then you want to share out the port 8000. So when we execute that, it takes a second to get started. If the documentation hasn't been built, at that point you would build all the documentation. The first time through, it does take some time, maybe 30 seconds or a minute perhaps. And now it's built and running. So it's serving it on that page, which we have open here. So localhost 8000. And so as I'm clicking around, this is actually looking at you'll see it respond here, looking at the documentation that's being hosted from my local build of MicroPython documentation. The nice thing about all of this is that as you make changes, like, I don't know if anyone's got any favorite ones. I think I picked up the ESP32 before. Okay, ESP32. Let's just throw something at the top. Every tone, everyone. Save. So we should see that it's been detected that it's changed, builds it, and it'll actually one of the nice things is that it will poke the browser to say, hey, go refresh. And so as soon as it's built, you'll get the updated thing. I didn't hit refresh in the browser. It detects the change and does it. So in terms of tightening that iteration loop, just being able to sort of save and see the changes almost immediately, or at least within seconds, that's really handy for me. So I recently, just for reference, updated the differences from CPython. All of these were looking a bit ugly. They needed to be updated because of more recent features that have been added to MicroPython. So this is actually the mainline version, so it doesn't have my changes, but some of the statuses need to be updated. And you'll see that the formatting looks really bad. Like these tables are wider than they don't word wrap. And so it took me a little while to figure out the appropriate CSS effectively to tell Sphinx to word wrap these. And so being able to experiment in a fairly quick turnaround was kind of crucial for that. So that was it. That was all I wanted to show you. I find that Docker container really useful, and that process nice for documentation.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. So if you could all go and improve the MicroPython documentation, that'd be great. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
That's it. Isn't too painful. Lost the chat window. There it is.
Work on the documentation is also really cathartic. It's one of
It
those
is.
things where you open the documentation, you look at all the pages, and it's easy to think, oh, look at all this good, high quality content. Once you get stuck in there, you really start realizing how many gaps and rooms for improvement it is. And it's a really good feeling to get in there and actually make those changes and then see that, like those ESP32 docs that you just pulled up that we overhauled in its entirety. Like, God, that was a long time ago now.
Well, yeah.
But you know, it was a really good feeling once you get it done, and now to know that that's sat there and been useful, and I know that I've seen that referenced many times since, and it's just good to know that it's improvement. So
It's very satisfying. Yeah.
Yeah, certainly if there's an area that you know in the documentation there's something not quite right, you know, I strongly suggest you get in there and try and make the changes, because it's not hard, as Matt just showed. It's very easy to make the changes, and a lot of goodwill in doing so.
Yeah, actually, something that came up in today's present this internally at work. We have a label for documentation updates. So this, just by clicking on labels and docs, that'll bring up all of the issues and pull requests for that are documentation related. You'll see there's a bunch in there. These are actually really good low-hanging fruit. Filtering through these to figure out, you know, is this useful? Let's finish it off, right? Actually, this is the exact one I clicked on earlier today. It's interesting. This is a classic example, though, that someone's actually put together a pull request. Damien's given feedback on it, and then they've just not done anything about it. And that happens a lot of the time, unfortunately. Now, look, this is only a month ago. Maybe they're going to come back, but it's also right. Like, if these are easy changes to make, then, you know, go ahead and make those changes. It won't take very much effort. And then you too can get the glory of being in the list of contributors for MicroPython. But seriously, like, a lot of it's really useful stuff. There you go, Andy. Do the PR following feedback here. It can be a bit soul crushing when you put together all this effort to submit a PR and then you get actual feedback you realize the job's not quite done.
Also, if you're making those changes to something that you had to make the changes for, and it was just like, oh, well, I've made these changes, I'll just submit it as a PR, and, you know, if it's good, it's good, you know, happy days. And
Yep.
you did that while you had time, and then by the time it gets reviewed and someone gets back to you, it's just like, well, this isn't the thing I'm focusing on now, so I'll deal with that when I'm next focusing on this.
Which is never.
Never.
Yeah.
Yeah, getting that feedback, feedback is just something that's so good about software engineering, that you're constantly getting peer feedback, and it's really good.
Yeah. It is.
I'm just looking at the Sphinx conf .py, and I'm just wondering how much. I know I looked into Sphinx a while back and found that it can do some really cool stuff, like test the code segments. So if you put like a syntax error in code, it'll actually error and stuff. Is that enabled as well?
I'd have to go check for that particular feature. I haven't tried that one.
Yeah, cool. I'll have a look.
But the bigger question is that can we enable it? Yes, basically.
Yeah.
Most of those features are pretty straightforward to add. The only caveat there would be that some of them require extra extensions to be installed. So we need to make sure that that's done on Damien's build machine, because at the moment he's still got that as a separate in the walled garden build machine. A good way to check that is, I didn't mention this, but if you've come across Read the Docs before, Read the Docs is a service which hosts Sphinx documentation effectively, and you can link it to a GitHub repository.
Yeah.
So it's great for, like, if you want to fork MicroPython, create a branch and do all your changes there, you can then attach Read the Docs to publish your branched copy of the documentation. I mentioned that because they've got a list of like the common extensions that Sphinx uses. So if it works on Read the Docs, it's probably going to work on Damien's build machine.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah, cool.
Sphinx is actually, it's a big documentation engine. And there's a lot of things you can do with it that are really quite neat. Like you can refer to modules or functions or whatever in a really terse kind of neat way. But yeah, coming to grips with it takes a little while. And thankfully it is widely used, so it is also really widely documented as well. So yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I think something like the thing Damien mentioned earlier with rendering polygons, it'd be really cool if you could just write the code to, draw a polygon, and then that polygon, the documentation will, generate a canvas and actually put the polygon after it.
Yeah, that would be really cool.
It's a way to make something easy really hard, but really cool.
It would be cool. I've been wanting to do something like that in the Unix port for a long time. So I have an implementation of FrameBuff which would render to like an STL canvas. Don't have that yet, but yeah.
Well, I wrote a little a library for sort of combining 3D models together a while back, and I used Sphinx to get it to generate 3D models, and then so underneath it was a little canvas where you could just like click and rotate the model that was written
really
above
cool.
it. It was really cool. So I can potentially, that's why I'm asking, because I can potentially get what I learned with that and apply it to MicroPython.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
That'll be fantastic. Yeah.
Was that Docker container in Docker Hub? I don't see it.
Yeah, it should be in Docker Hub. That's where I'm getting it from. Mini docs, Sphinx doc. Let me find a reference.
I just did a Docker search and not seeing it, but maybe I'm searching it.
Yeah, it is.
It's no big deal. I mean, I can use another one or just.
Yeah, the reason I went through a couple of them to find that one. The reason that one was useful is because it had, a bunch of the installed extensions. In particular, it had the theme that MicroPython uses, so it looks identical to the published version. I mean, in general, MicroPython's use of Sphinx is fairly straightforward, fairly vanilla.
Yeah, I didn't find too many problems. I didn't use a Docker image container last time. I played with it, but probably should have done for cleanliness. But yeah, it seemed to spin up okay when I was editing it last time.
Yeah, it's not too hard. trying to think. Apart from like, it's got code, syntax coloring, a couple of other bits and pieces. It's nothing terribly fancy.
Yeah, that's good. No good. I was just wondering if there's a way of I can't remember if there's a document on contributing to docs. I can't remember if there is one in the repo. That might be a useful addition.
Yeah, there's a README at the root of the doc directory, that's the only real documentation on contributing to the docs. But it does talk about the dependencies. If you want to install it yourself on your own system, it'll talk about pip installing Sphinx and the RTD theme and a couple other bits and pieces you'll find you'll need. If you do want to build the PDF version, that is harder. It actually uses LaTeX. It's a really big install that, yeah, it's quite tricky getting all those dependencies correct, and differs a fair bit between operating systems. It's also broken a few times in the past because it's complex, I think. Yeah. Yeah, it uses LaTeX and LaTeX PDF, which uses Text Live and Ztech and Sam Super and Zindi and a bunch of other things. It's over a gig in the dependencies you need to pull down. I think in general, MicroPython's docs are really good in terms of like reference documentation. It covers that aspect pretty well. I think it misses out a lot like on tutorials and getting people started and that kind of stuff. And the quick ref's really the only thing we've got for beginners. But I guess if you contrast it with CircuitPython, they do a great job of putting together like tutorials about how to do things with CircuitPython. We're lacking a lot of that in MicroPython. And there's different audiences for different kinds of documentation. So, yeah. Anyhow, go forth and document.